And we are starting with question 2. Business ventures. Now, I always say business ventures is a bit of an adventure because we deal with so many aspects. And the aspect that we are going to look at in question 2 this morning is about investment securities. Now, please, please, please don't confuse the two. We have business investments as securities, and we have business investments as insurance. We are dealing with the securities, the investment side of things, the money. Now, when we look at question 2, when we deal with securities, grade 12s, I cannot stress this enough. This is the most important question that comes up in every single paper. Is the functions of the JSE. I don't like to use the word stock exchange, but if you know it as stock exchange, it is the functions of the JSE security, otherwise known as the JSE. Grade 12s, this is a must. You must be able to know the functions of the JSE. When we look at this particular question, we are looking at discuss the functions. So first and foremost, please remember that the question is going to give you a cognitive verb. That cognitive verb tells you exactly what you need to do. What is the topic? In this case, the cognitive verb is discuss. And the topic is the JSE in terms of the functions. And now learners tend to stop reading. They see the full stop and we're done. No, we're not, grade 12s. We are now looking at how many facts must I be able to give. Now, when we look at 8 and we look at the cognitive verb discuss, you should already have in mind that we are looking for something a little bit more than just half a sentence or a third of a sentence. We must discuss. When you have a discussion with somebody on the playground, you're not just going to say to them, encourage investments. Why are you wanting to encourage investments? Why are you wanting to encourage new investments? Okay. And for how many marks are we going to give it? Discuss, cognitive verb, split ticks. So therefore, I need to tell the marker a fact, and I need to tell them why I told them that fact. And I need to give them 4 sentences, 4 full complete sentences to obtain the 8 marks, because split ticks means I'm going to get 2 marks for 1 full complete sentence, and it will be split. Take note, I haven't even looked at the answer yet. I've simply looked at the cognitive verb, the concept, and how much I must write. Grade 12s, it is incredibly important that you know how much you must write for each question in terms of your answer. Don't waste your time in writing a whole page if the question is only requiring you 4 or 6 or 8. I'm also going to give you a note that when we look at the JSE, when we look at any question, please remember you have your 2 important tools or 3 important tools. First thing, you have your exam guideline. Your exam guideline tells you exactly what you must know as a learner. You have your second resource, and that is your core notes. You must go through these, both of them. And then you have any other additional notes that your teacher or your educator has given you. Don't lose those things and don't put them aside. Now, this particular question about the JSE, take your time in answering the question properly, but also be aware of the fact that there are core notes And the core notes make provision for bullet 9 and 11 of your core notes. Please remember that when we look at raising primary capital, when we discuss that, I need a little bit more. It's not just about raising primary capital. Why do I want to raise the primary capital? There must be a reason. So you are going to be able to receive a mark for encouraging new investments and for raising primary capital, but it's going to be one fact. It's no longer split. I'm going to repeat that. In your previous notes, bullet 9 and bullet 11. So go and highlight that in your core notes. It no longer is separate. We're now looking at both of these sentences and we're putting it together so that one can have a discussion about it. So you're going to receive primary capital, raises primary capital, 1 mark, by encouraging new investment possibilities, 2nd mark. Again, I'm looking at my mark allocation. 8 marks will be awarded for a discussion of the functions of JSE, and please take note of where the ticks are going to be indicated. It serves as a barometer / indicator. So that is 1 mark because I now need to say why. Because of economic conditions within South Africa. So I know what is happening. I'm also making sure that my investors are staying informed of share prices. How do I do that? How do I inform my investors? I publish the share price daily. Just with that, I'm going to explain to you again that the discussion must give me the function of what the JSE does. And I need to give 4 full complete sentences. Grade 12s, read through all of your answers in your core notes and your textbooks. And you make sure that you choose the easiest ones. Acts as a link between the investors and the public companies. When we're dealing with investments, we can't necessarily all do it on our own. So therefore, we need somebody else in the middle that can link us up. And shares are valued and assessed. Why are they assessed? By who are they assessed? They are assessed by experts. You and I are still learning. We're not the experts, but those shares are valued and they are assessed. Choose the easiest functions. Again, look at your cognitive verb, look at your topic. What is it that you need to be discussing? And you're looking at how much I must do. You must remember, writing in full sentences on the functions of the JSE will obtain you full marks. If you write in half sentences or incomplete sentences, you can only be awarded 1 mark. And that becomes crucial for every question that you answer. We're moving on to 2.2. Take some time, read, know what is being asked of you. We underline what it is you must do. In this question, you must remember not to confuse the types of investment opportunities with the forms of investments. I'm going to repeat that. Do not confuse types of investment opportunities with forms of investments. Remember, not everyone may have an opportunity to invest, but they have the access to some form of investment. We don't all have the same opportunity to invest, but we have access to the form of investment. And that becomes very important to when we look at what this particular question is asking of us. We're looking at the types of investment opportunities that were used by CT plumbers in each of the statements below. Now, therefore, I need to identify the type. What type of investment opportunity do I have? When we look at 2.2.1, CT plumbers invested 50,000 Rand for 6 months at 12% interest with a financial institution. So there are a couple of things here that play an integral role. Yes, it was a company. How much did they invest? For how long did they invest? And at what rate, what percentage interest did they get? And in this case, it's a financial institution. This now becomes important because you're dealing with a financial institution. You're not dealing with a company, you're dealing with a financial institution, and those give us an indication that we're looking at a fixed deposit. I invested 50,000 for 6 months at an interest, so therefore I am receiving money. I'm receiving interest. So that then becomes a very important part, because remember, you are investing money in a financial institution and you are earning interest, and you're earning interest for 6 months on the 50,000 that you invested. Remember, we're still looking at the types of business investment opportunities. 2.2.2, CT plumbers received dividends. Hashtag important neon lights. It's dividends for their portion of the ownership in Blu-ray Limited. That LTD needs to give you another hashtag, another neon lights, because it is a form of ownership. That form of ownership, ladies and gentlemen, needs to be very clearly understood. When we're talking about LTD, if we don't know the form of ownership, is that not a clue that we need to be able to give? Now, when we look at that form of ownership, we need to remember that LTD falls under what? Think quickly. Take 2 minutes. Take 3, take 4, take time to circle Blu-ray LTD. Take the time to look at what the statement is asking. We are looking at dividends. Grade 12s, therein lies your key. It belongs with a form of ownership. And where do we talk about dividends? Dividends, we talk about shares. Blue Range Ltd can only be a public company. Now that public company, that dividends can only lead to our answer of shares. Look at what I've done. I've highlighted dividends. That should be your indicator, your hashtag, your neon lights. And then we move to the portion of ownership in Blue Range Ltd. Circle that Ltd, because public companies issue shares? When we look at 2.3, I'm going to say to you before we even look at the question, please note the following. Investment decision factors must be linked to decisions to invest. You need to take the time to research examples of types investment opportunities and forms investment that are relevant to each investment decision. Grade 12s, you need to invest, but you can only invest if you know that you've done your homework. Homework is the research. What am I wanting to do? What am I wanting to achieve? By means of what investments are there? What forms of investments are there that I could potentially get my hands on? And I can only do that if I've done my research. Don't come say to me, no, oh, I just want to invest in this because I've got this. Why do you want to invest? What is the reason? And that brings us to our question, 2.3, of discuss the following factors that should be considered when making investment decisions. You don't know what is out there, but you also need to know what can impact your investment. When we look at a factor, we're going to look at the very first factor as liquidity. Now, grade 12s, please remember, liquidity. Liquidity. Do not confuse the meaning of liquidity with liquidation. Liquidation is seen as a strategy, a business strategy, and it's not covered in paper 2. Liquidation is a business strategy and it's covered in paper 1. Please also do not confuse the meaning of the return of investment with the period of investment. Remember, we're looking at factors that you need to consider when you make a decision to invest. Now, when we talk about liquidity, I'm talking about the amount that can be invested in a type of investment. And when we talk about liquidity, you talk about liquid in a bottle. That liquid can be converted into something else the minute you do something to it. So I've taken a decision, I want to disinvest, and therefore I can take my investment and I can convert it into cash quickly or easily. So when you're looking at normal water and you have concentrate, I can quickly put that water in that concentrate or the concentrate into the water, and it can be converted into a juice or a Powerade or a game or something that has changed from one form to the other. So I've invested in a specific type of investment and it can be converted to cash easily. Why? Because that is the type of investment that I chose to invest in. It is used to describe the ease and the speed with which an investor can convert an investment into cash. Liquidity. Liquid. Think of ice. It's water that has been frozen for a period of time. When you take the ice out of the freezer, Guess what you do? You put it outside, or you put it into water or your drink, and that drink, if it's a hot day, that ice cube is going to melt quickly because it's hot. If it's a slightly cooler day, it's not going to melt with the same speed as if it was hot. So liquidity, how quickly I can convert some of my investments into cash. 2.2, return on investment. Yo, this is everyone's favorite one. Why? Because it's how much I'm going to get back. What am I going to get in return because I made this investment? Again, please don't confuse the meaning of return on investment with the period of investment. Grade 12, look at the word return. What am I going to get back? It refers to the income from the investment. And now you can get various types of investment returns. We namely speak about interest, we speak about dividends, and we speak about increased capital growth. But it's based on the original amount that has been invested. Return on investment. I have taken my money, I haven't invested it, and now I'm going to get an income in return from that investment. And it's either in the form of interest, dividends, or increased capital. But guess what? It's going to be based on the growth of the very original first amount that was invested. Also going to remember the very one that every learner always likes to use. High risk investments yields a higher return. But then I'm also going to say to you that there are low risk investments, and therefore it's going to yield a slightly lower return. It is based on what am I going to receive? Based on the risk of the investment. Again, I'm going to say to you, what am I going to get in return? Should I put that decision in play? Please don't confuse liquidity with liquidation. Liquidation is a business strategy. Return on investment is what am I going to get in return? When I look of a period of investment, how long am I going to invest it for? Period of investment refers to the duration. How long am I going to have this investment? And how long will influence your return on the investment? So if I have an investment and I only put it away for 6 months versus a return is going to be greater, should I keep it in for 2 years? When I look at the period, the duration, I am looking at the longer I leave it, the more I'm going to be able to get in return. The shorter I leave it, the less I'm going to get. The longer the investment period, the higher the return. We're moving on to question 2.4. Before we start 2.4, I would like to just stop and take a bit of a breath in terms of making sure that you don't confuse a fixed deposit with an RSA retail savings bond or a unit trust as a form of investment? When distinguishing between an RSA retail savings bond and a unit trust, we focus on the minimum amounts required to invest. Now, when we look at question 2.4, we're looking at evaluate the impact on the following forms of investment. Now, remember, question 2.3 discussed the factors. What must I consider when making a decision? Now I'm going to look at the form of investment. And this particular question is asking you to evaluate the impact. Now, I always use the good example when I'm in class. When I hit the board with my hand, I'm going to have an impact. It's going to be positive because I'm going to captivate the attention of the learners within the classroom. But I'm also going to have a negative impact because it could potentially hurt my hand. Now I need to evaluate whether it's a good option or a bad option. And in this case, I'm looking at evaluating the impact of the following forms of investment. A fixed deposit. When I look at a fixed deposit, I'm looking at the positives. Another word for positives are advantages. So should I go for this particular form of investment? Should I invest in a fixed deposit? There is going to be an advantage for me. I can decide on the period of investment. And it can be over a short term, a medium term, or a long term. But remember, I'm evaluating this as a particular form. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? What are the advantages for me as the investor? Hell, I can decide if it's short, medium, or long term. And I can choose for how long it is going to be invested because it's based on my decision as to what I want to do with it, because it's either going to work for me or it's not going to work for me, because what suits me. And that is part of the reason why we're looking at the positives or advantages and the negatives. So when we look at the disadvantages or the negatives, what would prevent me from using a fixed deposit as a form of investment? The investor cannot withdraw the funds before the maturity date. Remember, the word fixed gives it away. It is fixed for either a short term, a medium term, or a long term. And that date is decided upon when you decide to choose this as a form of investment. So the minute you say, oh, I've ran into a problem, I need some cash, I want to go and withdraw from my fixed deposit, you cannot withdraw those funds before the maturity date. Another negative or disadvantage may be that it may not outperform the effect of inflation over a long period of time. So in this particular form of investment, there are positives and there are negatives. There are advantages or there are disadvantages. You decide as the investor what suits you best. But remember, what suits you now may not suit you in the long term. Inflation rate might go up. Then you might need cash. But you are hampered because the maturity date, you cannot withdraw those funds. Remember, we are evaluating the impact of the form. What shape is the investment going to take? We're now looking at RSA retail savings bonds. Ladies and gentlemen, this is meant to encourage saving. It's a bond that you can invest in here in South Africa. And part of the attraction of the RSA retail savings bond is that the returns are guaranteed. As interest rate is fixed for the whole investment period. So whatever happens in the world, whatever happens in and around us, the guarantee is that you'll get a return at the interest rate that it is fixed at. And the other very attractive advantage to the RSA retail savings bonds is that you can receive interest twice a year. So you don't, like you looked at the fixed deposit, if you need cash, you cannot withdraw it before the maturity date. Here we're looking at an RSA retail savings bond where they are guaranteeing you the return and you can receive interest twice a year. Should you run into any problems and you need cash. But then I'm also going to say to you that with every advantage, there is also a disadvantage or negatives. Now you're going to say to me, but ma'am, how am I going to remember this? RS Retail Savings Bond is here in South Africa. And for you to invest within this form of investment, you have to have a valid South African identification. You need to have an SA identification. So this way, if you are a foreigner, it's going to discourage you to invest. But because you are South African and you have identification, you can invest. So as a negative, investors need to have that SA identification, which may discourage foreigners to invest. And you need to have a minimum of 1,000 Rand that you can invest. Now, if you think of the tough times and how people are struggling, 1,000 Rand is a lot of money, but the RSA retail bonds requires you a minimum of 1,000 Rand to be invested, which is very difficult for small investors to accumulate. Again, we're looking at the positive side, we're looking at the negative side. If you don't have SA identification, you cannot invest. And if you don't have 1,000 Rand to invest, then you cannot use the RSA Retail Savings Bond as a form of investment. Then this investment cannot be for you. But if you can obtain 1,000 Rand and you have identification, you can invest, you'll get a guaranteed return at a fixed rate for the entire duration of the investment period, and you will receive interest twice a year. So why are all South African citizens not investing in RS retail savings bonds? Treasury, not just any treasury, National Treasury has launched an SA retail savings bonds top up, allowing individuals to invest as little as 500 Rand. So it will cost you 500 Rand to open up the account. And then retail investors can top up their investment with 100 Rand at a time. Ladies and gentlemen, that right there is originality from print media. And it's there for you to utilize. Originality as part of an essay question. You can now utilize the RSA Retail Savings Bond to open up an account for as little as 500 Rand. And then you can top it up as a retail investor with 100 Rand at any time. Wow. That sounds amazing. So we've looked at a fixed deposit. We've looked at RSA retail savings bonds. And please take note, all of these forms of investment require you, the candidate, to give 4 facts. Why? Because each of them will be 8 marks. So we can give 2 positives, we can give 2 negatives. And remember, we are evaluating. So evaluate is split ticks. And when you see the word impact, you're looking at the negatives and all the positives. And please, grade 12s, if you forget a negative, then learn another positive. But you can give positives and negatives. And please go for the ones that are the easiest for you to remember. Guaranteed returns means I get something back at a fixed rate. And I get it twice a year. I don't just get it once a year. Make a story for yourself. You are here in South Africa and you're looking to invest. You are a South African citizen, and therefore I can invest in it because it's guaranteed and I get my return twice a year. So I will be happy in June and December. Christmas in July, Christmas in December. When I look at the negatives, the only people that can invest is if you have South African citizen identification. Sorry. And the big thing for me is I need to have a large amount, and that is 1,000 Rand. So for small investors, it's going to take a very long time for me to get that 1,000 Rand together. Just think of Christmas time. It costs a lot of money to buy presents. That's the negative side of it. But the positive side is if I can get the 1,000 Rand for the Christmas gifts, I can get a return in the form of interest twice a year. Yo, I'm super excited. Let's move on to the next form of investment. Remember, we're evaluating the impact, positive and negative, and we are looking at unit trusts. I am putting my trust in a form of ownership. I cannot do this on my own, so therefore I need to have a fund manager, and this fund manager is going to buy the shares on the JSE for me. I just give the instruction. And the fund manager is going to manage the fund. He's going to manage what I want based on the instruction that I give them. And guess what? If I don't want to be investing in that form of investment anymore, I just issue the instruction and I say it is easy to cash in that investment when I need money. Unit trust. I'm placing my trust in somebody else. They are going to manage the fund for me. They are going to buy the shares on the JSE. And when I need the cash, I can cash it in because I have a need. On the negative side of that, if you want to invest for a very short period of time, this is not going to work. Now, how do I remember this? Trust is not built on the first time that I've met you. Trust will only be there when you've experienced it with somebody and it's there for a long period of time. So if you want to invest for a short period of time, unit trust is not the way to go. But it's also not for you who want to avoid risks at all costs. You're working with unit trusts that's linked to the JSE. The JSE comes with risks because the market can be volatile and is volatile as we're seeing every day. So when I look at the negative, I'm looking at the unit trust as a form that I could potentially invest in, but trust takes time. So if it takes time, I cannot invest for a short period of time. But it's also not for me that wants to lose. Because investing in a form of ownership is going to come with risks. I'm evaluating the impact of a unit trust. I'm looking at the positives, I'm looking at the negatives. The question is going to be posed for 8 marks. I need to give 4 facts of full, complete sentences. Please take note of where the marks are allocated. Evaluate is split ticks for the first half of the sentence, and then the second mark is awarded for the last part of the sentence, right at the end. When we look at your impact on the form, we are making sure we're looking at positives and or negatives. We're now moving on to question 2.5. Please take the time to read the scenario. The scenario is there with information to guide you as to the types of questions that are going to be coming ahead. Please don't just directly start answering the questions. Please take the time to read the questions first and then move into reading the scenario. It becomes very important that when we look at the scenario, we are highlighting things that become important to the question that are asked. Please also remember that this question is going to require of you to do more than one thing. Now, you will see from the very opening sentence in the scenario, we're dealing with preference shares. and shares. So I'd like to just state the following. The best method to study the different types of shares and the types of preference shares is to use a table. We need to get the link of what is a preference share versus what is shares. I'm also going to point out that when you identify types of preference shares from statements, do not just write ordinary shares. Instead, write ordinary preference shares. Please be very careful with that. Keep that in mind when you are studying. Now, in this scenario, they have given you Ready Limited. Ready Limited offers different types of preference shares to shareholders. Some shareholders bought shares that will not allow them to receive past dividends. Others chose shares that allow them to share in surplus profit of the business. First things first, grade 12s. The question you highlight. This question requires you to do more than one thing. It requires you to identify two types of preference shares, but the question doesn't stop there. The second part is you need to motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario. Hashtag neon lights, super important. You need to quote. Now, grade 12s, please let's stop and think a moment. You're in a rush. You want to get the answer down on your answer sheet. But you think that taking a part of the sentence out of the scenario is going to be okay. Please don't. Please take the time to write the full complete sentence out from the scenario as it is. Because it's asking you to quote. It's not asking you to paraphrase. I know time is short, and I know time goes incredibly quickly when you're writing. And now you're dealing with stress as well. Just stop. Read the question, read the scenario, and take the full complete sentence from the scenario as your quote. So we're looking at the two types of preference shares. So you are identifying. Where you are identifying it? From the scenario. And you are motivating by quoting from the scenario. Now, in most past papers, you would have seen that they use a table, or they use the table that's given in the question paper as a guide. Now, when you see as a guide grade 12s, it simply is that. You may choose to use it or you may not. But the question and the guide is guiding you as to what you need to do. In this case, the instruction at the top of the table will be, use the table below as a guide to answer question 2.5. Grade 12s, you don't need to fit it in that space. You are entitled to use more space. Don't use your time in drawing the table. Simply do a T and have your type of preference share and the motivation on the right-hand side. Have your number one, have your number two. Why? Because you have to identify two types of preference shares. I'm giving you the time to think and read again from the scenario what the type of preference shares are. The very first preference share that we see is non-accumulative preference shares. Now you will have a look that you need to motivate why you say that. Please have a look at the second line. Some shareholders bought shares that will not allow them to receive past dividends. Now this becomes important. Non-accumulative preference shares. Key concept in the motivation is when we look at allow them to receive past dividends. So you cannot accumulate and keep it from the past and now you get more and you get more and you get more. Therefore, it is non-cumulative preference shares. 1 mark for the type and 1 mark for the motivation. Again, grade 12s, look at the motivation. The second sentence is completely written down. We haven't paraphrased. Now look at the second sentence. Others choose shares that allow them to share in the surplus profit of the business. Now remember, your business is running and it's making money. Now the statement is saying in the surplus profits of the business, you can share in the surplus of the business. So I am participating. I'm working. And because of that, it's a preference share. I'm participating preference share. Others choose shares that allow them to share in the surplus profit. When I have water at the football match, we are all participating in a team, and therefore I'm not going to provide water for one of you. I'm going to provide water for all of you because we are participating. And what are we participating in? You are participating in the shares that you have invested in, and those shares will make a profit, hopefully. And the minute you have surplus, it means you have more, which means they are participating preference shares. 1 mark for identifying the preference share, 1 mark for identifying the motivation. The motivation, grade 12s, is quoted from the scenario above. A question like this is readily seen in various forms in paper 1 and paper 2. Where the learner is required or the candidate is required to motivate the answer by quoting. You take the content from the scenario and you apply it to the question that's being asked. I hope that was clear. And again, I'm going to reiterate, hashtag neon light, super important. You must motivate by quoting from the scenario. Come on, grade 12s. I know you can do this. We're going to get this right this year. Question 6. We're still busy with investment securities. Grade 12s, remember, when we look at our question, we're looking at the cognitive verb. The cognitive verb in this question is distinguish. How do I distinguish one concept from another? In this case, we're looking at distinguishing between simple interest and compound interest. Take note of your mark allocation. 8 marks. I need to distinguish. What is simple interest? What is compound interest? 8 marks. 4 for simple, 4 for compound. Also remember, distinguish, split ticks. I also need to make very clear that when we look at simple and compound interest, we need to create some form of a link. I need to compare my apples with apples. I'm dealing with simple interest, I'm dealing with compound interest. I'm still dealing with apples. The only difference is the one is in its simplest form and the other one is in its compound form. So it needs to be like for like. And remember, when we deal with compounded interest, regardless, compound interest will always yield higher returns as interest is accrued. How do I remember it? I remember when I look at the word C, the C is open. So I'm open to more. Whereas S has got 2 openings. So therefore it's going to yield less of a return. Compound is always more, it's going to yield higher returns. Okay, so we're distinguishing between the 2 concepts. We're distinguishing between interest, apples and apples. Simple interest, interest is earned on the original amount. Tick. Why? It is split ticks because the cognitive verb is distinguished. And remember, I need to give a justification as to why I'm saying the interest is earned on the original amount and not on the interest accrued. Whereas simple interest, interest is earned on the original amount invested, but it doesn't stop there. As well as the interest earned in previous periods. So simple, it is just on the original amount. No other interest is taken into account here. But when it is compound interest, now I'm looking at the original amount that was invested and the interest that was earned in the previous period. As I have said, when I speak about simple interest, it's got 2 smaller gaps, one at the top of the S, one at the bottom. So therefore, I'm going to yield less of a return on my investment. And compound interest, it is one big C and it's open to receive more at once. So therefore, it yields a higher return on the investment. Take note for 8 marks. 4 for simple, 4 for compound. I'm looking at the cognitive verb, distinguish. I'm distinguishing the one interest versus the other interest. We're now going to take a look at 2.7. Now, grade 12s, I realize you see the word calculate. Now you're in a panic, now you're in a stress. I'm telling you, you must not stress. You need to be able to prepare for calculations. Whether it is in section A or even in section B, you must be prepared. Go into the exam knowing that I can calculate. Simple interest, compound, in section A or section B. But remember, grade 12s, this is not a maths paper. We do not use mathematical formulas to calculate simple and compound interest. This is business studies, a big capital B. We're going to lambaste it with our business formulas. Always make sure that when you are attempting a calculation, when it comes to interest, your final answer must exclude the principal amount, and that only the interest is indicated when asked. So again, I'm going to say this to you, grade 12s. Please stop and read. What is the question asking of me? What must I be able to do? Grade 12s, it is important that you remember, practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect, and therefore you need to practice various ways of calculating the simple and compound interest, whether it be monthly or whether it be annually. You should be able to do either or. And grade 12s, we need to use the correct terminology. If you use the incorrect terminology, you're going to lose marks. A very good example is when we speak about the word interest. When we talk about investments, we talk about interest. We don't talk about profit. But learners make that common mistake of saying you are going to receive 10,000 Rand profit when it should be 10,000 Rand interest, for example. So please use the correct terminology. Practice makes perfect. Practice different methods, whether it be annually, whether it be monthly. Make sure that your final answer, when it pertains to interest, excludes the principal amount. And remember, this is business. We show our calculations. Why do we show our calculations? If we make a mistake, we can still be awarded marks. Right. So 2.7.1. Calculate no longer scares us because we've practiced it. We're going into the exam knowing we're having a calculation. Whether there is a calculate or not, I can calculate the amount of interest that Zinzi will receive after 3 years if she invests with Capsa Bank. Now, firstly, we are going to look at the fact that, yes, you need to calculate. Second, you need to calculate the interest. Now, that hashtag neon light needs to come in. When we're working on the interest, it does not include the principal amount. But we also need to take note of the 3 years and who is she investing it with? Capsa Bank. Now we go to our scenario. Zinni inherited 100,000 and wants to invest it in a fixed deposit for 3 years. Inherited 100,000, invest it as a fixed deposit for 3 years. Capsa Bank offered her 8% simple interest per annum. Hashtag neon light per annum. And it's a financial institution offering 8% simple interest. That's one financial institution. And Fed Bank offered her 8% compounded interest per annum. Grade 12, the first thing that should jump into your mind is there's two financial institutions. The one is issuing simple interest, the other one is compounded interest. Now, don't jump the gun here. You're simply needing to calculate the amount of interest after 3 years. Let that sink in, grade 12s, because it becomes very clear that you need to calculate the interest for 3 years. Before you've even started, you've underlined the 100,000, you've underlined the 8%, and you've gone to Capsa Bank, which is simple interest. Remember, it is for 3 years. The first thing you do is you write your formula. Your mathematical formula does not come in here. It is your business formula. So interest equals P multiplied by R multiplied by T. It's also very important, grade 12s, that we remember that the information is given. You need to substitute it correctly. And remember, you are stressed. You are thinking about 101 things while you are punching on that calculator. Take the time to check, have I substituted the values correctly? Have I looked at the case, the scenario, and I have seen that I've done it correctly? For that formula and the substitution, you're going to receive 1 mark. You need to be able to say that 100,000 multiplied by 0.08, that is the simple interest multiplied by the time. How long? 3 years. We're going to say 8,000 multiplied by 3, which gives us 24,000. That is the interest that she will receive after 3 years if she invested with Capsa Bank. Now your head is probably ringing and you're saying, oh, another calculation. But remember, you've only done Capsa Bank at simple interest. Now question 2.7.2 says, calculate the amount of interest that Zinni will receive after 3 years if she invests with Fed Bank. Again, 3 years, 100,000 at 8%. The big difference, the hashtag neon lights, is the interest is compounded per year. So when we deal with compound interest, we need to make sure that we understand there could be 2 options of looking at this. We could look at it per year. Option 1, taking each year and calculating the interest. Year 1, 100,000 multiplied by the 8% multiplied by year 1 gives us 8,000. But remember, compounded interest means everything and it's from the previous period. So now I'm in the second year, but I don't no longer have 100,000. I have 108,000. And now I multiply it by the 8% multiplied by 1 because I am in another year. Remember, it said per annum. Now the interest I have is 8,640 Rand. It no longer is 108,000. I'm now looking at 116,640 Rand because I've taken the interest from both year 1 and year 2. Remember, compound interest is from previous years. And now I'm multiplying it. And again, I'm going for the year. Remember, I need to now look at the interest, the total interest, because it said for 3 years. I now take the interest and I add them together because the question says calculate the amount of interest that they will receive after 3 years. So it's not after 1 year, not 8,000. It's 8,000 plus the second year plus the third year. Gives us a total of 25,971.20 cents. Take note of the mark allocation. Year 1, year 2, year 3, individual. For the total interest of adding everything together, you're going to receive 2 marks. Option 2. We've got our formula. P multiplied by bracket 1 add I to the power of n minus P. Grade 12s, your formula becomes important. You are working with a principal amount, and after 3 years, you're looking at the total interest. You need to make sure that you subtract your principal interest of 100,000. Please take note again. Look at the mark allocation. Make sure that you are calculating it correctly. Make sure you include your brackets. Make sure that you include to the power of 3. The power of 3 is the 3 years. Your answer includes your principal amount, and therefore you will have a look and you will see that the very last line requires you to subtract the principal amount. You are going to receive a mark for subtracting the principal amount. Why? You're looking for the interest. And you will see that it's the exact same amount as in option 1. You decide what is easiest for you. But remember, this is business studies and we don't use your mathematical formulas when we calculate compound and simple interest. Once we've calculated the interest, bet your bottom dollar that you are going to have to say which is the better investment option. Now, grade 12s, if you know the difference between compound and simple, then you're going to know that compounded interest is usually your better option. Why? Because it takes previous years of interest into account. You need to recommend, in your opinion, based on calculating your simple, based on calculating your compound, which is going to be the better investment option to choose. Remember, this can be 4 marks worth, but you're going to state the best option and you're going to motivate the answer. So in this case, your recommendation is going to be compound interest. I know I'm a little bit naughty when I teach my learners. I say, whenever they ask compound and simple interest and which is the better option, compounded interest is always going to be better. So for stating compound interest, you're going to receive 2 marks. Remember, the question is out of 4, which means you are going to get marks for the motivation. Motivation in this account, compound interest yields more interest than simple. And that is something that becomes very important. Keep the motivation short and sweet, but give the facts. You are stating that compound is more because it yields a higher interest than simple interest.